Good to see you, man. Good to see you.
Good. Yeah, good to be with you here right now. We're gonna talk about your book, which is
Yeah.
coming. Everything is everything. I'm really interested, Clive, in
Yeah.
the name.
Yeah.
That was what grabbed me first and foremost. Obviously, I've got Jamaican in me.
Yeah,
There's
man.
gonna be those who are out there who that resonates with straight away. Um, Tell us a little bit about why you called it that, and just
Yeah.
wax lyrical about the book in general for those
Yeah,
who are
absolutely.
eager now to grab a copy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, everything is everything. Everything is everything.
Everything is everything.
Everything's okay. Everything's going to be all right. Um, no matter how difficult things get, sometimes we want to get to that state where we can say everything is everything. It's all good. It's okay. It's going to work out. It'll be fine. And I've reached a stage in my life where, I'm happy in my skin. I'm happy with who I am. And I hope there are others who in this world, feel the same way. And despite everything, despite what people will say, what people will think, no matter what their attitudes are, their racism, their bigotry, their hatred, I'm happy with who I am. And so I don't care what you think. Everything is everything. And that's it. That's basically it. Yeah.
The book's out this week, right? And for those who are wondering what week that is, September the 14th, 2023.
Yep. Yep.
Clive, one of the things that obviously struck me was the fact it's a deeply personal memoir,
Mm,
and you speak on family, in detail and in a way that I don't think people have had access to you um, before that way. So they're going to be very intrigued by your connections there. Speak on, how your parents shaped your worldview, and I know you were grew up in Lancashire
yeah.
in the 1970s. So
Mhm.
talk about how where you're from shaped who you are, your parents, and your desire to
Mm.
to become a journalist.
Yeah. I mean, my parents are Windrush generation. A little bit after the Empire Windrush, docked at Tilbury. So they arrived in 61 and 62. My dad sailed to Southampton from Jamaica, and my mom arrived by plane, actually. She flew from Kingston to Heathrow. And their early experience in Britain, has shaped my attitude to the world, and to being black in this country. They faced difficult times. They faced racism. They faced bigotry. They kept their heads down, and that was their way of dealing with it. But I've always felt that racism and bigotry is the frankly the ill and the problem of the persecutor, of the person who's actually engaging in these things. I'm black and I'm black. Everything is everything. That's just the way it is. That's how God made me, and I'm proud of that. And if you've got a problem with that, that's your tough luck. My parents, tried to sort of avoid it, kept their heads down, in a way to deal with it. And I have decided, certainly in this book, is that it needs to be confronted, and it needs to be taken on head on, as it were. And they're decent people, as so many in the Windrush generation were. They didn't deserve the abuse that they got on occasion. No one does. And many in the Windrush generation had fought for this country. They were willing to put their lives on the line for this country, and they were willing to help rebuild this country. And that sense of decency and honesty and pride in who they are, I hope is something that I've managed to sort of carry with me throughout my life, and I'm very, very proud of them. And I say, actually, I've said in another interview that this book is a love letter to the Windrush generation, and it is, on their strength and resilience in dealing with the issues that they faced when they came here, but all in the service of furthering the cause of their own families, improving their lives and their children's lives, but also helping to rebuild this country at a time when, some people didn't want to. 2 million whites, remember, left this country at the end of the war. They, quite rightly in their minds, didn't want to be around, bombed out rubble buildings and ration books and all the problems that there were at the end of the Second World War. They didn't want that either. They were looking for a new life. So they went to Canada, they went to Australia, they went to New Zealand, South Africa. But that left a worker shortage here, a big worker shortage. And that was the hole, the gap that the Windrush generation filled. And they should be honored for that role, and people should recognize just how important they were to a nascent NHS, to British Rail, to the buses, to rebuilding physically with their hands on building sites up and down the country, rebuilding Britain. And that sense of hard work and decency, I hope I've managed to get a little bit off from my Windrush generation parents.
What's interesting, and this wasn't one of my questions in front of me. You started off this interview by saying that, you're comfortable now to be the person who you are. You've reached that place. Given everything you've just outlined about your parents and, the strength of fortitude for them to, go on that journey. It's interesting that you reach a stage now where you can say you're fully comfortable with who you are. When did that light go off for you? And at what stages, I guess, weren't you as comfortable with being Clive Myrie, who sits before me today?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been comfortable with being Clive Myrie. What I think has happened is that society has got comfortable about me. And that's a sort of crucial difference, I think. So society, for instance, now embraces Black journalists and embraces Black reporting and the idea of multiculturalism and the idea of diversity and inclusion. When I was getting into journalism, that was not the case. That was not the case. And it was clear to me, seeing women in the newsroom being farmed out to the less serious stories, the and finally stories, the bake sales and Women's Institute meetings and that kind of thing. And it was clear to me that as a Black journalist, I could see myself having my future dictated not by the quality of my reporting, but by my skin color. So come Notting Hill Carnival, who are they going to send? The Black guy. And I kicked against that hard, man. I kicked against that because I did not want my color defining who I am in a way that I did not appreciate. I did not want someone else to define my career at the very beginning, simply by virtue of the fact that I'm Black. And what I'm proud of when it comes to the BBC is that it actually understood this. It totally understood this. It got where I was coming from. And in a way, it didn't want to waste this opportunity in a fast-moving, developing, multicultural Britain, of which it was a central cultural pillar. It didn't want to mess it up either, because everyone pays for the license fee. And if Black people aren't paying for the license fee because they feel that they're not being represented fairly, then you're going to have no BBC. If disabled people or gay people or women are not paying the license fee because they're not being represented fairly, then that's an existential threat. So the BBC understood where I was coming from. This wasn't me denying my heritage in any way, shape, or form. This wasn't me denying being Black. This was me saying, I'm going to dictate my career, not you. I'm not going to leave it up to lazy thinkers who think, oh, there's a riot down the street, send the Black guy. I'm not going to have that. And interestingly, I interviewed Trevor McDonald many, many, many years later. And he did exactly the same at ITN, exactly the same. But one of the first interviews Mandela did with Trevor McDonald. I was the first on the plane to go over, one of the first on the plane to go over and do a panorama documentary on George Floyd. We need to be the agents of our futures, not some news editor who says, oh, it's the Notting Hill Carnival, send the Black guy. And I hope now, having done that when people do see me on screen, Black or white, they're not thinking, oh, it's the Black guy. They're thinking, it's Clive Myrie. And that's what I always wanted.
Yeah, I think that's definitely comes through your pursuit of excellence. It's good to hear the fight you've had to go through on the other side, because on screen you look and sound no different in terms of what you're doing to
Yeah.
anybody else,
Yeah.
right? Whether you be Welsh and
Yeah.
whatever region you come from, it's about the pursuit of excellence. And
Yeah.
sticking with family, I know achievement flows through the bloodline, right? Your great grandfather helped build the Panama Canal.
That's right.
And one of your great uncles fought in the First World War, later to
Yeah.
become a prominent police detective in
Yeah.
Jamaica, right?
Yeah.
You studied law at university, clearly always been quite studious. Would that be right? And outside of academia, Clive, what keeps the brain ticking? What else are you interested in?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I enjoyed school. I enjoyed university. I had vague designs on becoming a lawyer because, frankly, that was what my family wanted. You know, all second generation immigrants, their parents, they didn't leave everything they know to come to a new land for their kids to grow up to be bums. They wanted them to be successful and professional, doctors and lawyers and that kind of thing. And I didn't, but I always wanted journalism. And so it was a little bit of a disappointment when I did become a reporter. But my parents and family, you know, understand that now. And beyond that, I mean, I love the arts. I love the arts. At school, I was really good sportsman. Played for the school at cricket and tennis and rugby. I love my sport, although I don't engage in it as much as I should now. And I love culture, opera, classical music, jazz. Love my jazz. So there are lots of things that I'm interested in and that I'm able actually nowadays to pursue through my work. So I present the proms every summer. You know, I make travel documentaries now at the BBC, travel logs. And it's great to be able to sort of show that side of my personality that is a little less straight-laced and news focused and a little bit more relaxed. So there's a lot that gets me up in the morning, you know, not just news.
It's interesting you mentioned those other things that you do, which help to give insight into who Clive Myrie is, because for a long time, you know, a younger aspiring journalist coming up saw those opportunities afforded to others, not so much to us. And it seemed as though those avenues weren't open. Different landscape now, and I want to touch on where you think the landscape is in a minute. In 30 years, though, Clive, of reporting on some of the biggest stories, what you mentioned Mandela, you mentioned George Floyd. What else has left an indelible mark on you that maybe, you know, we wouldn't have known about had you not written this book?
I think the way that I connected to the rise of Obama, and the importance for me to see someone like him reach the highest office in a country that has a continuing legacy of racism as a result of slavery and the slave trade. You know, where slavery was entrenched, where it was nurtured, where it was developed in the Americas. For a black man to rise and reach the highest office in the land was just astonishing to me. And I had done stories as the Los Angeles correspondent and Washington correspondent before Obama came to promise. I'd done stories on various states trying to bring new prosecutions, fresh prosecutions against members of the Ku Klux Klan who had got away with lynchings and murders in the 50s and 60s, and who were being retrospectively prosecuted. I interviewed a guy who was hoisted by his neck on the end of a rope, and someone in the crowd shouted, "He's not the guy who committed the robbery. He didn't do it." And they let him down. So a guy who survived the lynching. You know, I lived and worked in a city like Washington where the rich live there and the poor live there, and the rich are white and the poor are black. You know, a horribly divided city, the nation's capital, where people who were black and white would work together during the day, but at night they'd go their separate ways, completely the separate ways, where you hardly saw any black and white mixed race couples, for instance. I'd worked in that kind of America. I'd worked in an America where the attitude very much of some within Congress and the Senate was that black people were lower beings, that legacy of racial superiority still existed. So to go through all of that in my history with America and then see a black man rise to the top was just astonishing. And, Obama, by virtue of his success in simply attaining the highest office in the land, is historic. Was everything in his presidency tickety-boo? Absolutely not. But one of the biggest things and his biggest achievements was putting healthcare on the agenda. In no way can any future administration now mess around with Obamacare. And indeed, if you try to, you're in serious trouble. And he did that. Nixon tried to get some kind of universal health package on the statute books, didn't do it. Jimmy Carter didn't do it. And Obama did it. And in doing that, he lifted up 30, 40 million people, the majority of whom are black. So I have a special place in my mind and in my heart for Barack Obama and his achievement and my reporting of his presidency and his rise to power, his election night, his inauguration. Never forget that day, being on the Mall in Washington, freezing cold. There were people over from the Bahamas, from Barbados, from Africa for this moment. I will put that easily as one of the highlights of my life.
So I guess it segues into my next question then. Does journalism in 2023, does it still excite you? Are you, given the tech advancements and the way that news is consumed these days and the way that's changed, does it still get you going?
There are still so many stories out there that are new and fresh and exciting to tell, and that's always great. Am I a big fan of the social media revolution? In lots of ways, no, because there's a lot of crap you can put out there with no comeback. Remember, man, if I get something wrong on the TV, right, you can complain. You could even get me fired if I deliberately lie or get something wrong. You do that on social media, not a problem. Put it out there and it spreads around the world within a millisecond. Not a problem. And yet you will have people who will say, I only get my news online. I only get my news from Facebook. I only get my news from, the new media because that's where the future is. The legacy media, BBC, ITV, Sky, they're all liars. They're all liars. Trust me, if you have a complaint to make, you can get me fired. If there is a lie online, nothing happens. Nothing. And that's what we're seeing. And that, I think, is a big, big problem. And I will put out there Exhibit A, the United States of America, as a complete disaster zone for the truth and fact and honesty. I have big, big reservations for the way the media is going at the moment.
I'm sure there's many budding journalists, right, who are going to be picking this book up, not least to find out more about you, Clive, but just to kind of get insight into the type of animal they have to be to ascend to the levels that you've achieved. We've touched on those today. If you were starting out now, you'd left uni, you graduated, you've got your guns in your holster. Where would you shoot, sir, in order to get to where you're going? Yeah, what advice would you give those journalists?
Yeah, interestingly, having said everything that I've said about new media, it does offer up much more opportunities, many more opportunities for young people to get in, to show, what they can do. And it does mean that there can be much more of a multitude of voices that's out there, which is a good thing, absolutely a good thing. You can start a blog, you can start a website, you can get things going on your own from a laptop in your bedroom, and that's incredible. And then you move on from there. Hopefully, that you will have a portfolio of work that you can show to a prospective employer, if that's the BBC or the editor at a news website. You can get a portfolio of stuff together that says, I've got enthusiasm, I've got ideas, and I can get stuff done. and I can tell stories in a creative, interesting way that people are going to want to read or hear or see. So yeah, there are opportunities out there. I think I would, however, advise people to try to do some kind of formal journalism course, because I think you do still need to know the who, what, where, when, why, or the basic facts of a story. And once you've got that, it feels like the world could be your oyster. So I would recommend a formal course, and then have some gumption and ideas. No one should employ you, and no one is going to employ you if you haven't got ideas or fresh thinking or can bring something to the table. So what is it you've got? What is it that an employer is going to find interesting about the way you write, or your style, or the voice that you've got, the inner voice that you're trying to get out in your work? What is it that you can make you attractive to someone who's looking for writers or journalists or so on? Find that thing that you're really enthusiastic about and just go for it. Go for it.
Clive, it's been a pleasure talking to you, man. What was the most difficult chapter to write?
That is a brilliant question. And I think it was the Barrel Children.
Right.
Because I learned a lot of things about Lionel, Peter, and Judith that I didn't know about, and that I'm sad I didn't know about. How difficult it was for them adjusting to life, coming over here from Jamaica, not knowing who the Bay City Rollers were, fitting into a new class where they all know who the pop stars are and the latest, singers are and actors, and coming from Jamaica, that wouldn't necessarily be the case for a young kid. They'd speak Jamaican patois. I mean, that didn't cross my mind that I would be hearing the same language as my parents had been speaking, Jamaican patois. So I was used to it when I came across Lionel, Peter, and Judith, but that their friends at school wouldn't have a clue what they were saying. And I didn't get that discombobulation. I didn't get it. And I feel very sad that I wasn't able to help them with that transition, because I didn't understand they were going through that trauma. I didn't understand. And it's actually only having long conversations with Judith that I got it. But that's like 40 years later, man.
It gives added meaning to the adage that he or she that feels it knows it, right? It's difficult outside of that. So
yeah,
it's been a pleasure talking to you, sir. Everything is Everything, out now, out this week, 14th of September. Clive Myrie. When's the next one, Clive?
Actually, funnily enough, I'm working on something which I think is great. The publishers, they may not think so, but we'll see. Right. But it stems out of an episode that happened in this book. And I hope it comes off, because it's really dear to me. And I think it will be dear to a lot of Caribbean people who had relatives, this is all I'll say, who had relatives who worked on the Panama Canal.